For your creative project this week, you're going to use item 33 from your term exam. There were several versions of this problem, but they all have the same context. There was a prize for first place at a talent show, and then each place after 100 less or something like that from the previous place. So you should create a scenario that is similar to this one. It doesn't have to be a talent show. It can be anything. But it does need to create a linear graph. In other words, the points on the graph should line up in a straight line. So choose some kind of context that does that. Now this first one happened to be a sequence, and an arithmetic sequence at that, which means the graph only contained points. A discrete graph will contain just the points that are not connected. So if you do choose to do a discrete graph for part A, then remember your graph will be not connected. It will be distinct points in the graph. Sequences specifically need to start at 1 on the x-axis. There won't be anything on the y-axis for your sequence. The second question in your exam, which is the second part of your project, needs to be an exponential function. Now the one I gave you was a continuous function because it was water measured as a function of time, and so when you measure things you use continuous functions. You do connect the dots in the graph. Now you don't have to write something exactly like this. You'll remember I gave you 2 ordered pairs, and then you use those ordered pairs to figure out the answers to the questions. You could just go ahead and write the equation to start, so that's not something you have to do for your project, but you do need to tell me if your function is discrete or continuous and why. Remember, discrete situations are things that we count, like people and blocks. Even money can be discrete. Continuous are things that we measure, like time and distance or volume or weight or something like that. So for your second scenario, remember it needs to be exponential, and it needs to be discrete or continuous. It can be either one. But I do want one of the two to be discrete and the other one to be continuous. So you choose which one you prefer to be discrete, and then the other one will need to be continuous. So let's look at our steps on our project. I've given you pretty detailed instructions here, and I've included some pictures for you to help you make a determination about what's discrete and what's continuous. The discrete graphs are going to look like these. They're going to have dots that are not connected. They could be curved and they can be straight. So if you do your linear functions, they're of course straight, and your exponential functions will be curved. If you have a continuous graph, then notice they're connected and make a smooth curve. Now none of these are exponential, but your exponential can be continuous if you want it to be. And then finally, you're just going to answer these questions. You can number them if you want. Just make sure they're all answered somewhere. You will need to create a table, a graph, and an equation, and your graph should represent the domain in your context. So if there's no negative numbers in your context, there should be no negative values in your graph. So just remember that. If your y-intercept is not in your context, tell me why. If your y-intercept is in your context, then what does it mean? What does it represent in the problem? Like for the talent show didn't have a y-intercept because there is no 0 place in a contest. But the other one did have a y-intercept, the one for the exponential. So it may be different depending on what you're doing. You will need to locate a different point other than the y-intercept and label that point or show that point in the graph, and make sure that point is showing up in your table. Write that point in function notation, like f of some number equals some other number, and then explain what that point represents in context. Is it volume? Is it weight? Is it time? What's going on? Explain it. And then tell me what the slope is in context. Explain it. What is your domain and range in context? Like, where should you start and where should you stop on your graph based on your context? So again, don't go into the negatives if there's no negatives in your situation. Make sure you're using numbers that make sense in the problem. And then the same thing again when you do your exponential down here. Now finally, you're going to present on Flipgrid you're going to give us a quick explanation of your project. Now, don't spend a long time. This is not like your other one. You really have less time, so you can't really discuss all of it. So when you do talk about your creative project, limit it to 1 minute 30 seconds, and you may discuss any of these things and more if you can fit it in. You can read both of your scenarios or just one of them. You could describe both of them, or you could just describe one of them. Compare and contrast the two functions that you have, maybe why you chose a particular one to be discrete and why you chose a particular one to be continuous. You could talk about the domain of the graph or your point that you put on your graph. So it doesn't matter what you choose, as long as you are talking about these types of things and you're limiting your talk to 1 minute 30 seconds. So cut out any unnecessary talk about your project. Like if you're talking about something unrelated to mathematics in your project, you may want to cut that part out and focus on the math. If you have any questions, we have tutoring after school Wednesday and Thursday. You may come in and work on your project, ask questions, and get help with any part of this.